The late afternoon sun felt good on my skin as I rounded the corner onto our street. I'd been cooped up all day, working on a freelance project, and a walk was exactly what I needed to clear my head. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming honeysuckle. It was the kind of day that made you appreciate the simple things, like the quiet hum of suburbia and the friendly wave from Mrs. Rodriguez across the street. But as I neared my house, a knot of unease began to tighten in my stomach. Something just felt off. And then I saw her. Karen. My delightful, perpetually aggrieved, neighbor. She was hunched over my mailbox, her back to me, rummaging around with an air of furtive desperation. My blood ran cold. What in the world was she doing? I picked up my pace, my leisurely stroll transforming into a determined march. As I got closer, the truth became sickeningly clear: she was pulling out my mail, stuffing it into her oversized handbag. The audacity of it was breathtaking. This woman, who had made no secret of her disdain for me ever since I moved in, the sideways glances, the muttered complaints about property values, the thinly veiled accusations of noise violations, was now actively stealing my personal mail. My mind raced. Was she looking for something specific? Bank statements? Credit card offers? Something she could use against me? The possibilities were infuriating. Karen. I called out, my voice sharper than I intended. She jumped, startled, dropping a handful of envelopes onto the sidewalk. She whirled around, her face a mask of poorly disguised guilt and something else, something that looked awfully close to righteous indignation. Mike. What a surprise, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I was just picking up some litter. You know, trying to keep the neighborhood clean. Litter? My mail? I gestured to the envelope scattered at her feet, clearly addressed to me. Those are my bills, Karen. My mail. What were you doing with them? She huffed, crossing her arms defensively. I haven't the slightest idea what you're talking about. You're always making accusations, Mike. Always trying to cause trouble. I could feel my temper rising, but I forced myself to stay calm. I saw you, Karen. I saw you taking my mail out of my mailbox. That's a federal offense. She glared at me, her eyes narrowing. You're harassing me, Mike. This is harassment. I'm going to call the police. And with that, she pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over the emergency call button. I knew exactly where this was going. The threat of a 911 call hung heavy in the air, a weaponized accusation ready to be unleashed. Karen, don't do this, I pleaded, trying to reason with her. Just put the mail back, apologize, and we can forget this ever happened. Her lips curled into a sneer. Forget it? You think I'm going to let you get away with this? You're constantly intimidating me. I'm scared of you. The sheer absurdity of the statement almost made me laugh. I'm 6'2", a former college athlete, but I have never laid a hand on anyone in my life. And here she was, painting me as some kind of menacing brute. I am not intimidating you, Karen. I'm asking you to stop stealing my mail, I retorted, my voice rising slightly. It was a mistake, she seized on it immediately. See? See how he's yelling at me? He's threatening me, she shrieked into her phone, her voice trembling with manufactured fear. I could hear the faint sound of the 911 operator's voice on the other end. I need help. I'm being assaulted by my neighbor. He's a big, aggressive man. The dog whistle was deafening. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This was exactly what I had feared. A baseless accusation, fueled by prejudice, with the potential to completely upend my life. Every black man's nightmare. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew the statistics, the disproportionate rate at which black men were arrested and incarcerated, often based on flimsy evidence and racial bias. I had to de-escalate the situation, somehow. But how could you reason with someone who was so determined to paint you as a villain? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to speak calmly. Karen, I am not assaulting you. I am simply asking you to return my mail. There are witnesses. Mr. Gomez across the street is probably watching right now. She shot a quick, nervous glance toward Mr. Gomez's house, but quickly recovered. He's lying. He's trying to manipulate you. I'm in danger. She rattled off our address to the operator, her voice laced with hysteria. Please hurry. I don't know what he's going to do. I wanted to scream, to tear my hair out in frustration. This was insane. But I knew that any further escalation on my part would only play into her narrative. So, I stood there, frozen, watching as she weaponized her privilege, transforming herself into a victim while I was silently cast as the aggressor, a dangerous black man threatening a helpless white woman. The injustice of it was suffocating. All I could do was wait for the police to arrive, hoping that they would see through her charade. But hope felt like a fragile thing in that moment. The flashing lights of the police cruiser sliced through the quiet suburban afternoon, announcing the arrival of my potential doom. 2 officers emerged from the car, their expressions neutral, their hands resting on their holsters. My stomach churned. I knew the drill. Keep your hands visible. Speak clearly and calmly. Don't make any sudden movements. Comply with every instruction. Survival Guide for Black Men Encountering Law Enforcement. Karen rushed towards them, sobbing dramatically. Officer, thank God you're here. He attacked me. He was yelling at me, threatening me. I was so scared. She pointed directly at me, her finger trembling. One of the officers, a young white man with a buzz cut, immediately turned his attention to me. Sir, step away from the woman and put your hands behind your back. I obeyed instantly, my heart pounding in my chest. As the officer slapped the cold metal handcuffs around my wrists, I couldn't help but feel a surge of bitterness. I hadn't done anything wrong, yet I was being treated like a criminal. This was exactly what Karen wanted. Officer, I was simply asking her to return my mail, I said, my voice carefully controlled. She was stealing it from my mailbox. The officer glanced at the scattered envelopes on the sidewalk. Is that true, ma'am? He asked Karen, his tone skeptical. He's lying, she insisted, her voice rising again. He's trying to twist the story. He's the one who was harassing me. The other officer, a black woman with a stern expression, surveyed the scene with a discerning eye. She seemed less inclined to take Karen's story at face value. Ma'am, did you call 911 claiming you were being assaulted? She asked, her voice calm but firm. Yes. I was terrified. He was right in my face, yelling at me. I thought he was going to hit me. Karen's performance was Oscar-worthy. I could practically hear the violin swelling in the background. I wanted to scream, to protest my innocence, but I knew better than to interrupt. Any outburst would only be used against me. Just then, a voice rang out from across the street. Officer. I saw everything. It was Mr. Gomez, my kind, elderly neighbor, hurrying towards us, his face etched with concern. Hope flickered within me once more. Mr. Gomez approached the officers, his gait a little unsteady but his voice clear and firm. I saw the whole thing, officers. Mrs. Henderson was taking Mr. Tomlin's mail from his mailbox. He asked her to return it, and she started yelling and called the police. He never touched her. He stated, I even have security camera footage that I can show you. Mr. Gomez glanced at me, a look of quiet sympathy in his eyes. He had always been a good neighbor, always friendly and respectful. I was grateful for his willingness to speak up, to risk Karen's wrath by telling the truth. The officers exchanged glances. The black female officer nodded slightly, her expression unreadable. The white male officer, however, seemed less pleased. He hesitated for a moment, then said, "Sir, we need to investigate the situation. Please wait over there." He gestured towards his patrol car. Mr. Gomez stood his ground. "But I have proof. I have video evidence that shows exactly what happened." The officer sighed, clearly annoyed. "Sir, we appreciate your cooperation, but we need to follow procedure. Please let us do our job." Karen seized on the opportunity to regain control of the narrative. "See? He's interfering with the investigation. He's probably in on it too. They're all ganging up on me." The female officer cut her off. "Ma'am, please calm down. We will review the evidence and determine what happened." She turned to Mr. Gomez. "Sir, can you show us the security footage?" Mr. Gomez smiled gratefully. "Of course, officer. Come this way." He led them towards his house, leaving Karen fuming on the sidewalk, her carefully constructed facade beginning to crumble. As I stood there, handcuffed and humiliated, I felt a surge of relief. The tide was turning. The truth was coming out. But I also knew that the damage was already done. The suspicion, the embarrassment, the fear, those things wouldn't disappear so easily. The officers returned a few minutes later, their expressions noticeably different. The white male officer looked sheepish, while the black female officer wore a look of grim satisfaction. She approached me, her voice apologetic. "Mr. Tomlin, I am very sorry for the inconvenience. We have reviewed the security footage, and it confirms Mr. Gomez's account. Mrs. Henderson was indeed taking your mail. We will be removing the handcuffs and releasing you immediately." The white officer removed the handcuffs, avoiding my gaze. The sting of the metal on my wrists faded, replaced by a burning anger. Karen had nearly gotten away with it. She had used her privilege to try to destroy my life. And for a moment there, I thought she had succeeded. The weight lifted from my shoulders as the handcuffs were removed, but the anger still simmered beneath the surface. I balled my hands into fists, resisting the urge to unleash my fury on Karen. "You should be ashamed of yourself," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You almost ruined my life." Karen, sensing the shift in power, began to unravel. Her composure shattered, replaced by a raw, unbridled rage. "This is all your fault," she screamed, pointing at Mr. Gomez. "You nosy old busybody. You're always sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Mr. Gomez, visibly shaken, took a step back. "I just told the truth, Mrs. Henderson," he said quietly. "You were doing something wrong, and I couldn't stand by and watch." Karen advanced on him, her face contorted with hatred. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? You think you're better than me? Well, you're not. You're just a brown-nosing immigrant." The slur hung heavy in the air, a stark reminder of the prejudice that had fueled this entire ordeal. I surged forward, stepping between Karen and Mr. Gomez. "That's enough, Karen," I warned, my voice hard. "You're only making things worse for yourself." But she was beyond reason. Spittle flew from her lips as she continued her tirade. "You're all the same. You come here, you take our jobs, you ruin our neighborhoods. You think you can get away with anything." Losing control, Karen lunged at Mr. Gomez, her hands outstretched, clawing at his face. "Karen!" I yelled, grabbing her arms to restrain her. The officers, who had been standing nearby, sprang into action. They wrestled Karen to the ground, struggling to subdue her. She kicked and screamed, her voice a high-pitched shriek. "Get off me! Get off me! I didn't do anything wrong." Watching her thrash on the ground, I felt a strange mix of emotions, disgust, anger, and a flicker of pity. This woman had allowed her prejudice to consume her, driving her to commit acts of blatant criminality and hateful violence. The officers managed to get Karen under control and hauled her to her feet. She glared at me, her eyes filled with venom. "This isn't over, Mike Tomlin," she spat. "I'll get you for this." You haven't heard the last of me. The officers led her towards the patrol car, her protests fading into the distance. As she was being placed in the back seat, she turned one last time, screaming, "I want a lawyer." The car doors slammed shut, and the flashing lights disappeared down the street. Silence descended once more, broken only by Mr. Gomez's heavy sigh. I turned to him, offering a grateful smile. "Thank you, Mr. Gomez. You saved me today. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't spoken up." He waved his hand dismissively. "It was the right thing to do, Mike. She can't get away with this." We talked for a few more minutes, discussing the incident and the absurdity of Karen's behavior. He expressed his shock and sadness at her blatant racism, assuring me that she didn't represent the views of the entire neighborhood. As I walked towards my house, the setting sun casting long shadows across the lawn, I felt a profound sense of weariness. The ordeal was over, but the scars would remain. The knowledge that someone could so easily weaponize their prejudice, to try to harm me simply because of the color of my skin, was deeply unsettling. I went to my mailbox and retrieved the scattered mail, feeling a renewed appreciation for the simple act of receiving correspondence. Inside, there was a letter from my mother, a bill from the electric company, and a postcard from a friend vacationing in Hawaii. Ordinary, mundane things, yet they represented a connection to the world, a reminder that life went on, even in the face of hate and injustice. I took a deep breath, exhaling the tension and anxiety. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But today, at least, justice had prevailed. And that was something to hold on to. I would continue to live my life, to be a good neighbor, to stand up for what was right. And I would never, ever, let Karen steal my joy.